Well, the Memorial Day holiday weekend is come and gone, and the 4th of July is come and gone. Both times, many of us have taken advantage of the new fireworks law, and it's not really new anymore, I suppose, the fireworks law in Michigan. And it seems like there's a couple of packs out there. People love it or they hate it. And tomorrow at this time, we'll open the phones and talk about that with all of you. But today, we're talking about it from the enforcement perspective with Battle Creek Police Chief Jim Blocker and Calhoun County Sheriff Matt Saxton. Good morning, gents.
Good morning, Richard.
Good morning.
Welcome back. I really do, just observing, feel that people either love this or they hate it. And you're probably dealing with the tricky enforcement of it, I imagine.
And Richard, I think people's view on this changes by the hour.
Okay.
If it's next door to your house, you
Yes.
hate it. But if it's at your house, you like it.
It's true.
And that changes by the day.
Yeah. You think that's true, Chief?
Well, I think there's, of course I do. I think, too, I think one of the things is we live in a community, tight-knit community, and when your neighbor's lighting off fireworks and you can't sleep, and incidentally, we all live in these neighborhoods, too. I don't have a hearing or audible bubble over my home either.
Right.
It is frustrating. And I tell you, if you don't get your sleep or your beauty sleep, the next day, you're pretty darn upset. There are a lot of challenges with the law. They were recognized back in 2012 when the state changed their law. Mm-hmm. And we're just now starting to see how those have developed. And again, it goes right back to the importance of when our House and our representatives move on something like this. The fact that, because I don't recall ever being a discussion mm-hmm. internally or professional dialogue about whether we ought to do this. It's really important to reach out to us and at least from a state perspective, listen to the sheriffs, listen to the chiefs, listen to the local leaders, allow them to have a voice on how they design these bills and how they move forward.
So if you had been asked, what would you have said?
You know, one of the things is, along with the extending of the hours and the allowance of the fireworks themselves, day before, day of, and day after these national holidays, I think I certainly would have included more about what type of firework, because that also changed. Mm-hmm. Before, it was nothing airborne, and yet today, those are all allowed. And I think that's also further become a challenge because they're loud, they go off all night, and many of them are fired from mortar tubes, and they sound very much like a mortar.
They look like it too.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was watching. I went to a fireworks show over the 4th weekend, and prior to the start of the show, there were a number of folks lighting off their own nearby, and they are impressive looking, almost like the professional variety. I mean, they really do look similar to me, and that made me think that the process by which one lights these, I imagine, is just potentially as dangerous.
Every year we hear about accidents, although we didn't hear about any locally, although I didn't check with the Bronson mm-hmm. prior to coming here today. But we typically do hear about some national or regional tragedy involving fireworks.
Bet you do. So what about you, Sheriff? If you'd been asked how should you do this if we were to change this law, what would you have said?
Well, the tough part about the law, the way it is written right now, is the enforcement side of things. How can you enforce something that's legal on the day before and day after a holiday, but mm-hmm. you want to do it like this year? The 4th landed on a Tuesday. Right. Many folks celebrated the holiday on Saturday. It's not legal to use the fireworks at that time. Right. You know, so it's okay to do it 30 days out of the year in Michigan, but not the other 330. Mm-hmm. You really we need to look at how it's going to be enforced when some of these new laws are put into place. And every year there's bills added to modify the current law on the fireworks. And local municipalities can add a time, like locally most of them are midnight. You have to be done prior using the fireworks by midnight. On those days they're allowed. There's a lot of things that aren't looked at prior to passing some laws.
So a call comes in about fireworks being deployed outside of the appropriate days or the appropriate hours. How is that usually handled?
You know, we always look for and we ask for, we need either a cooperating witness, someone that is going to work with us, and we can validate. You know, we need evidence to carry it into court. We need evidence to bring it and say, yes, this is the party involved, this is the person who did it, and yes, they're in violation of this ordinance because it was after midnight or after 1 a.m. on New Year's Eve. That's the one date. There's an extended time period, or before 7 a.m. And that's a challenge, especially when the fireworks calls themselves. Certainly when the up-tempo and the calls for service are at incredibly high volume during some of this time, we're not going to get there right away. And again, that's why we ask for witness cooperation. They want us there. They want us to show up. And oftentimes we do, or we're in the area, but it's after the fact, but no one wants us to actually wants to be a part of the call. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
On July 3 through July 6, there were a total of 65 fireworks complaints. So in that 72-hour period, 65 fireworks complaints. 25 of those 65 were all during the illegal period, so after midnight, before 7 a.m. Out of that total number, only 22 of those callers did not want police contact at all. So you see how that changes the priority in terms of how we focus on this particular call. Here's the other thing. In that same period of time, July 3 through July 6, the total calls for service, not to include that 65 fireworks complaints, were 612 calls for service. Our officers were busy. That also includes 2 armed robberies, a B&E in progress, as well as a shooting. And we actually had a double shooting and a B&E all happened at the same time on July 4th.
Oh, man.
And that's also when we have just about a third of our force dedicated to the balloon event, which is a significant event in our community. So again, it's high volume call, limited manpower. It just happens to be that is an intensely busy period of time for us as an agency.
Just because fireworks enforcement, happens in those few days doesn't mean the other calls for service downtick to help you with that.
Exactly.
So how does the Sheriff's Department figure into all of this? So just talking about the July 4th weekend, and a third of the Battle Creek force is helping with the field of flight, and then these other things are happening. Do you get called in to back them up at all? How does this work?
We also assist with our contract in Springfield with field of flight, so folks in Springfield are busy. But in the out county, our deputies have to deal with several different local ordinances on the time differences, and so for those deputies to know that information. But our call load is much the same, scattered out throughout the county. Oftentimes we see when we get the calls for fireworks issues during the 4th of July celebration time. I checked with our night staff last night. They didn't have any fireworks calls last night. They heard the city had a couple. So we're starting to wean down from the 4th of July issues we have with fireworks. But oftentimes we see there's an underlying issue, a neighbor issue, that we get the call for the fireworks, but there's something else going on between the two neighbors, and we have to deal with that as well. So there is a couple bills in Lansing right now to restrict use in higher population neighborhoods. They haven't had hearings, so we'll see where those go. But as law enforcement administrators, we kind of keep an eye out of those bills in Lansing and reach out to our legislators to provide input.
All right, so there it is. The potential for this to change is already out there, as you alluded, Sheriff. The bills are there to tweak this thing. If you could change it, what would you change? What would make it easier to enforce this?
I don't think there's a lot we can do on the neighbor issues, whether a neighbor's upsetting a neighbor. But to me, it goes back to it's legal 30 days out of the year, but not the other. And when the holiday lands on the middle of the week, oftentimes the holiday's celebrated on the weekend and not one of those 3 days that it is legal. So need to look at options. I've always said we're governed best at the local level. So open it up and allow local municipalities to decide what works best for them. It's not always best to have Lansing saying what's best for the whole state. Open it up to local municipalities and let them decide what's best for them. And then we as local law enforcement can enforce that evenly.
Well, and that means, too, that in your case, with a broader enforcement area that you've got to know, as you alluded, what each municipality has decided is the law.
Well, but oftentimes throughout Calhoun County, most of the municipalities view things in the same way. Calhoun County is generally the same. It's not like they don't view things the same way as maybe the city of Detroit, but over in our area, generally the areas view things the same way.
Chief,
and I would go back to what I said previously. I would rather see folks celebrate with fireworks than firearms.
Well, and that's an interesting point. If fireworks were illegal, and certainly they have been, do you see more gun discharges instead as a means of celebrating?
Well, we do, and certainly in the city, New Year's Eve is notorious for the fact that people light off their firearms, and of course we'd rather hear fireworks. How to distinguish the two is a challenge. I do agree with Matt. I think there's some wisdom in checking out the high-density neighborhoods and the challenge it provides, but there also so social media can sometimes be the bane of our existence, but it can also be very helpful.
Right.
And through Nextdoor, mediums like Nextdoor, Facebook, neighborhood associations. Here in the city of Battle Creek, we have our neighborhood planning councils. Here's where they can step up, show a little leadership, as they have already, and start to have input with the city attorney and their commissioners about what they'd like to see and how they'd like to see something crafted, and then allow us to push that forward as a vehicle up to Lansing. It's happened in the past. They'll get together and they'll do a block party, or they'll shut down streets, and as a group, everyone is talking. I would never think that that's going to include everybody and everyone's going to be happy. But I think if the majority in that community can come together and agree on what is the designated firework time, where are we going to do it, what's it going to look like, I think that'd be far more helpful than what is certainly going on today.
We chatted with the state fire marshal about all this too, and he brought up some things that maybe aren't necessarily well known among folks who might be inclined to discharge fireworks. You have to be within outside of a 25-foot radius from something that might catch fire. You can't do this on public property. You can't be out in the middle of the street. I imagine you see all of that stuff.
And most of all, you can't be under the influence of alcohol or controlled substance.
How about that?
And children can't be in possession, and yet they are. You're right, and it's just problematic. And so again, one of our missions is to enforce community norms, and I think what we're finding here is we need to determine what is the community norm, what is going to be acceptable, and certainly in these higher density neighborhoods.
All right, so maybe there'll be some changes, maybe there won't, but the point is that these few days out of the year, life is a little bit more difficult for law enforcement to enforce that on top of everything else, which I expected you might come in here and say.
And we would ask that the general public be patient with our men and women that serve them every day. During the holiday time, it's extremely busy with other calls, and the addition of the fireworks calls just adds another layer of service that we need to provide. And again, I would ask the general public to thank the men and women in the uniform that serve them every day here in Calhoun County in the city of Battle Creek.
And as you pointed out, Chief, you have to prioritize the calls that you have in front of you.
That's right. That's right.
All right. We thank you for your perspective. As always, thanks much.